With what little remains of the Pantheon fleet screaming through the void with its tail between its legs, it's time for the real work to begin. At first, it's a desperate attempt to keep the disabled and destroyed ships and satellites from crashing into populated areas. With no way to stop them all, the ship's crews would simply strike the hulls with anything they had, weapons or their own ships, with enough force that it would cause the hulk of whatever was falling down to crash harmlessly in the middle of nowhere. The station that once held the floppy POWs was too large to move, yet it would still crash. It would crash well beyond the range of any populations on Mars. For a few moments, Mars and her surrounding ships simply stopped and watched the station burn up and crash onto the planet. A silent moment of respect for those who perished inside. They were prisoners. They didn't deserve to go out like that. And as they thought of prisoners, especially model prisoners, being so carelessly killed like that just fanned the flames of hate. As recovery efforts began, distress calls began arriving from the Kashmir and the Yanit. Quickly, the Spartans and several Martian ships, making up one full battle group, headed out to protect their humans' allies. Making best speed would still take several days, and as they reached friendly space, things were not so friendly. The Kashmirs had been decimated in numbers. The few ships that remained were still trying to use their interdiction devices to hit and run. They had torn into the Taints with unholy abandon, though the numbers of Taint ships were just too much for them to handle. Realizing the situation, the human ships didn't bother with words. Instead, they let the guns speak for themselves. When the human ships entered the Kashmir sector, the interdiction devices were actually deactivated. The reason for that was, while in FTL, there's no way to hide you from the sensors, no matter what you do. When any ship comes out of FTL, the electromagnetic static burst would simply overload the interdiction devices anyway, meaning that they would be seen and they would then give away the fact that they have a way of cloaking their ships. Now that they could not hide from the sensors, they have to rely on good old-fashioned horsepower and gunpowder. Driving the ships directly at the Taints, human ships no longer had to limit their weapon systems. Railguns, both spiraled and turreted, began to fill the ether, as well as massive energy-based particle lasers that cut clean through the Taints, tearing them a new asshole. Behind that were electromagnetically launched torpedoes. Using this catapult made those torpedoes move over half the speed of the Gauss rounds, and they moved almost the speed of light. Before the Taints realized who or what was shooting at them, the entire flank of their forces either went adrift or exploded outright. As the Taints tried to reform, the assault just didn't seem to stop. Aboard the flagship of the Spartans, they could see the massive destruction the Kashmir homeworld had received. Even the most untrained eyes could see the destruction is, well, basically the same as if a supervolcano exploded. That is why the command came out from the Spartan command. No prisoners, no mercy. The Martian battle group arrived near the Yankees' homeworld to see over half of the Yankees ships adrift and at least half destroyed, at least those that were out of the action. It is clear that they had actually followed the Cole Protocol and detonated the scuttling charge to keep the interdiction tech out of the enemy hands. Well, at least what you call hands for them. Going full burn towards the Yankee homeworld, they could see the floppy ships taking pot shots at the planet as they fired wildly into the darkness. This recon by fire was crude yet effective. Once a Yankee ship was hit, and provided their interdiction field remained active, the floppy would saturate the area with fire. A very skilled or very lucky helmsman could get them out of the kill zone in time. If they couldn't, the ship would come under full barrage from the floppy, just slapping them across the face with all this fire. If the field failed, The captain would immediately give the order to abandon ship while firing every single weapon that they could in order to give their crew a chance to evacuate. Since they would be the only target that could be seen, they would be swarmed. Any Yanket ships that is disabled would wait, so just wait enough for the floppy to get close before blowing it up with a scuttling charge. The resulting debris field would cripple or destroy any ship within 2,000 kilometers. Every human knew the Yankees' affinity for spite, so they also knew that the captain of the Yanket ship would detonate the scuttling charge, which is a 2 megaton nuke, by the way, as they laughed maniacally and gave the enemy the Yankees' version of the finger. The Mars fleet saw that the floppy were focusing on population centers when they took their pot shots at the planet. In particular, as they looked, they could see that hospitals, spaceports, city centers, and convoy routes were their targets. This information was spread across the human ships. Without a word, it would be known that no floppy would survive this assault. Driving headlong into the fray, the Mars battle group's weapons blazed out. From the fixed cannons to point defense cannons, the battle group came in all guns blazing as they made sure that all incoming fire to them was responded through 3 times at least. The Yankee home fleet that remains were much closer to the floppy than the humans were, so they could not drop their cloak. If they did, they'd immediately be just wiped out. However, they did have the ability to harass the flanks of the floppy fleet until the battle was over and the floppy were now stiff corpses in the vacuum of space. Once the space near the Kashmir and Yankit homeworlds were cleared and empty of all enemies, the rescue operations truly began. All planets hit by the assault had mass casualties, primarily from civilians. Even calculating with the Yankit and Kashmir fleets pretty much decimated, the losses of civilians vastly paled in comparison to the civilians on the planet's surface. At this moment, both the Yankits and the Kashmir saw that the humans were true to their words and they truly did protect them. In that case, all Yankit and Kashmirs left Earth to return home as they would need all hands on deck. Massive amount of ships and personnel followed them, mainly of volunteers that went to try and save as many as possible. Even with the orbital strikes on Earth and Mars, nothing compared to the destruction and sheer barbarism shown to the Allied worlds. For the Yankits, it would be like cleaning up after a 9+ earthquake. Difficult for sure, but nothing compared to the Kashmir. Their homeworld was now 41% uninhabitable. The dust and debris field stretched 2 hemispheres all the way north to south and is only slowed down by a narrow ocean that puts just enough humidity into the air to weigh down the dust cloud. Casualties are in the billions. A scene that united all in hate was actually a video that was taken of a group of human volunteers deep inside the impact zone of the Kashmir homeworld. There, they found a town where many had tried to wait out for rescue. Inside were families huddled inside this cave-like structure. Humans rushed in and found the survivors barely alive. They immediately got to work digging them out and giving them as much O2 as possible. IV drips are started, and they began yelling for those that were found to stay awake, come on, stay alive, stay with me, come on, stay with me, man. In this chaos, a group of humans are seen giving aid to a family of 7. A mother and her litter are barely hanging on. The humans are barely able to get any signs of life, so they just keep working. They keep working long after any sane species would have simply given up. 2 of the 7 are taken away as they are beginning to move just barely. The others are still getting mouth-to-muzzle resuscitation as another medical tech comes over. The rest of the survivors had been removed, and he could see the desperate actions of his team. He walks over and puts his hand on the shoulders of those working. They look up, and they can see him shaking his head, and they finally stop. Defeat is all over their faces as one human just won't stop. He's Doc, he hears, as he looks, and there's a hand placed on his, slapping the man's hand away. The Doc just turns and keeps going. Then the man grabs him and pulls him hard. They look at each other and no words are said. Doc looks down and finally stops. He looks at all those that did not survive. He turns up and screams in rage, turns towards the nearest wall, and you can see Doc beating his fists against the stone in sheer rage. While the Doc rages over not being able to save the mothers, others in the video are seen crying as tears streak down their dirty faces. Others do the motions and pray. A few moments later, every human stands with eyes full of resolve. They all say something so low that it is nearly indistinguishable on the video. Yet all of humanity knows the phrase, one more, just one more. As those on the surface of the home planet search for more survivors, those in the human armed forces have another phrase, no more. No more will the enemies of humanity get close to our home. No more will they threaten us with invasion. No more will we watch our families and friends suffer due to some genocidal xenopsychopaths. No more will they enter humanity's territory. When one reporter asked a few of the soldiers how are they going to do this? How are they planning on stopping the Pantheon, the Floppy, and the Taints? One turns back and gives an answer that would be the common answer given. When they arrived in the Soul Sector, they were completely folked. Now, we're going to have to go full General Kerensky on their asses.